Now, one of the things that I have to share with you is I think layers are one of the most abused features in all CAD packages. I think for me personally, I've been on the receiving end of a drawing that had 178 layers that this particular surveyor had chosen to use. Now, is that necessary? In my opinion, no. Oftentimes there will be geometry and details that you will want to keep separated. I think it gets taken to an extreme. If you're using, in my opinion, and again, you will find what's comfortable for you. If you're using more than 20 layers, there's definitely an issue if this is a septic system design. You don't need to use too many layers. You're going to get lost. Another thing that I see used or done commonly is the name of a layer will be cryptic. It'll say X, U, T, Z. And only the person that created that layer knows what that means. So if you're following somebody's work or you're sharing your work with somebody, they're not going to know what that layer represents. So try and make your layer names meaningful to the items that reside on it. So point elevation, very descriptive. You can expect to find the elevations for the points in the drawing on that layer. Point description, again, very descriptive. Point mark, or the point symbol, and so on. So when you create your layers, try and make the names meaningful. Keep them as short as you can, but if they're not meaningful, then you haven't done your job, in my opinion. I'm going to close this. It's quite a challenge sometimes to pick a name that is meaningful so that the people that follow you, and I'll include myself, following my own work a year or 6 months later, if I can't understand what that layer name means, it makes it more difficult for me to edit or update the drawing. Another thing that is very useful about layers is that if you want to know what layer an object is on, all you need to do is select it. So let's select that line. Notice the layer dialog or pull down has changed to 0. That's telling me that that item is on layer 0. I'll hit the escape key. Well, what about this one, this magenta line? I pick that and it tells me it's on layer final. So you can quickly tell what objects are on what layer by using that process. If you want to change layers, let's say I want to change to that layer. Well, it tells me that's the final layer. So all I need to do is select that drop down arrow, scroll down to the layer that I want to change to, and then left button pick it. That is now the active layer. What if I want to turn a layer on or off? Because I'm sure you're way ahead of me. You see this light bulb and you see some other icons here and you're wondering, what are those? Well, the most common action associated with layers is, once you've created them and you have geometry on them, is to turn them on and off because it's conflicting with something that you want to focus on in your drawing or you want to create. So if we want to turn the items on the final layer off, we just select the light bulb. And notice the light bulb has now changed to a dark light bulb. Let's go. That magenta line that was in the drawing has now disappeared. Well, it hasn't disappeared, it's just turned off. It's still part of the drawing, it's just not visible. And this would be the case with points. We need points in order to generate contours, but we don't want to see them in the published document. So this is how you would turn them off. Let's turn it back on. And illustrate again. All the items on the 0 layer, let's turn them off. Well, we had an awful lot on the 0 layer. Let's turn it back on. There's another icon right next to the light bulb, and that is the sun. It represents what AutoCAD calls the freeze or thaw feature. And you're going to find that turning the drawing on and off, or freezing and thawing it, for the most part, are identical. There are some differences between the two. In the same way that regen is different than redraw, although it looks the same to you on the screen, freeze and thaw act in similar ways behind the scenes to AutoCAD, as opposed to just turning the visible layer on and off. So you can choose, in my opinion, in today's day and age, with computers as fast as they are, you will not notice any difference between freezing a layer, and you cannot freeze your current layer, just so you know. I'm getting ahead of myself, but let's say we want to freeze the 0 layer. There. And notice the icon changed. The items, the objects in the drawing disappeared. Let's turn them back on, or thaw the layer. They come back. I'll use the layer on-off icon. So it looks as though it acts in the same way. Freeze and thaw are related to how the CAD program is relating to the object database, in the same way that regenerate is communicating with the object database, whereas redraw does not. The layer on and off only affects the visual screen. And we don't really need to talk about it any more than that. That's freeze and thaw. There's one other icon that is really important and useful, and I would say is undervalued, and that is the locking feature. You'll notice there's a padlock. Well, let's lock the objects on the 0 layer. Notice the lock is now closed. Let's go back to our drawing. Well, everything in white is on the 0 layer. Let's say I want to erase everything on the screen that isn't locked. I'm going to window everything. And notice I'm going from left to right. So I'm using a crossing window, so anything either inside or touching this box should disappear. But what happens? You'll notice only the line that was on the final layer is selected. And if I hit enter, that's the only thing that goes away. Why? Because layer 0 is locked, and that protects everything on that layer from change or revision. It's very useful if you want your point data to be visible but uneditable, if that's a word. It's a safe way to protect all the information on that layer from any inadvertent deletion or change. So you can use the lock or unlock command associated with layers. You'll also notice, if we open up the layers dialog again, There are other fields that are showing. You'll notice the thaw and frozen can be selected in this dialog. So here's layer 0. We could have frozen it here just by selecting the word thawed, which will toggle it to the word frozen, and vice versa. We can change the line weight. We can also, and it's difficult to see everything, we can choose to either print or not print a particular layer. So when we go to print this drawing, if we have set this drawing up so that the 0 layer is not going to print, we would toggle that to no, I don't want that layer to print. I do not use this feature in model space very often, but it is available to you. And that is about all I'm going to say about layers. Very powerful. Feel free to use them, but don't go overboard. For instance, a classic example is contour lines and contour labels. Oftentimes I will see the label will be on a separate layer from the contour itself. You are free to do that. I prefer not to. The only reason I can think of for doing it would be if you wanted your contour label to be a different color than your contour itself. Then feel free to do that. If you print your drawings in color, then that would be meaningful. If you don't, then I can't think of a reason when you'd show a contour label but not a contour, or vice versa. So if it has no meaning to the printed document, then in that particular case I would put my contour labels on the same layer as my contours, and so on. Just to recap some of the things that we talked about tonight, some of the housekeeping issues I called the editing commands. We learned, or we talked about, erase, move, undo, trim, extend, zoom, regen versus redraw, how to use the AutoCAD repeat feature just by hitting enter. We talked in detail about layers. You can have, I believe, 256 layers. I forgot to mention that before. You control color, line type, weight, whether you want to print or not print, whether the items on a particular layer are on or off, all within the layers dialog or the layers toolbar. I call it the layers toolbar. What do they call it? They call it the entity properties. AutoCAD might call it something different. But very useful.